All right, let's go ahead and get going. So great to see you all this afternoon, and per Star's comment you just made, we especially love if we actually can see you, so please do consider testing out video, knowing we'll be doing breakout sessions today. Appreciate you joining us for this deep dive session that actually came up through ongoing conversations with Chief Innovation Officers. Star and I found that every single time we were talking about something, we referenced an after action review. And we're excited to have some time today to talk about what continuous improvement can look like in a system of great schools strategy, as well as some tools and ways to approach taking on that work. So with that said, we'll share a little bit about who we are and what we plan to do today, and then we're going to get straight to the topic and want to ensure that we have plenty of time to actually work through these examples together today. So I'm Margot Rowan. I'm the principal overseeing innovative systems in schools at Education First. I've also been part of the SGS network, supporting it in a variety of capacities, including as an EA and a technical provider with School Action Fund since 2017. And prior to that, I was a teacher and school administrator, and then eventually was working in a district and left as the deputy superintendent there. So I see we have a wide range of roles on our call today, or on this session today, and know that you each bring a different viewpoint and perspective, and are excited to hear from you and have you here today. I'm going to pass it over to Star, who's my co-presenter.
Thanks, Margot, and great to see everyone. It's been an energizing summit as usual, and like Margot, I've had the good fortune of being a part of the SGS work really since its inception in the pre-K years, now that we've hit kindergarten for SGS, and have the good fortune of serving as executive advisor to Lubbock and Garland ISDs as well. Have come from a family of educators. It's certainly our family business, and have a great amount of respect for you all and the work that you would do. Spent some time in the classroom, and really excited about being able to connect the dots that you all at your leadership roles are able to connect in this strategic work. So excited to have this conversation with you.
Great. With that in mind, the conversation at hand. So our goals for our time together, we really hope to build understanding of the values, beliefs, and habits of a learning organization. Star and I know all of you, deeply believe that learning is central to the work that we do, not just for our students, but also for adults, and want to talk about what it means to be a learning organization. From there, we hope to equip you with some continuous improvement tools that can help with fostering reflection, and then have some time to actually plan for how to put those tools into use in your district. We know that for some of you, you already are using some after action review tools too. So I should also note here that along with these objectives, we hope that you get a chance to really share ideas that you have, tools you're using, and continue to pile on. We want to ensure that people really leave with some tangible next steps and resources that they can use to drive this type of reflection in your district. In terms of how we use our time, pretty soon we're just going to get into talking about what it means to a learning organization and what it means to put these continuous improvement practices into your practice. That time will also include the breakout groups. So in case you're joining a few minutes late, just another heads up that there will be breakout groups in this session. And so please make sure you're ready to engage in those. And then we'll come back to share some next steps before we hop off. Really hope that you feel like this is a safe place to share some ideas you have. All right, so in the spirit of sharing ideas and creating a safe place, a learning organization is an organization skilled at creating, acquiring, and transferring knowledge, and at modifying its behavior to reflect new knowledge and insights. So this is one definition for what a learning organization is. We know there's multiple definitions out there and multiple different ways you can think about it, but really want to emphasize that to be a learning organization, it really has to have some specific skills and mindsets that are baked into the work that you're doing and shared by the people in your organization, and that you have specific tools and ways to transfer the knowledge from that reflection to action. And so really thinking through that today, we want to ensure that you have some ideas of ways that you can maybe more formalize your learning agenda and the ways that you think about continuous improvement to replicate or to embody the work that you're doing to be a learning organization and continuously improve as a system, not just the schools. With that in mind, it dovetails nicely with the system of great schools. It is a strategy that is about district-wide problem solving. And so with that in mind, We know that understanding school performance and community demands and interests and what families want and need are central to understanding the needs and wants of your families to act on within your district. So when you think about continuous improvement in the heart of the SGS strategy and education more broadly, it's really about expanding what's working, replacing what's not working, and making sure that all options are on the table. And that applies to the specific levers and the way that you utilize the levers within the system of great schools, as well as how you work as an organization together. So it's a little bit meta. It's both about the system of great school strategy and approach, as well as how you work together as adults and as adults who are interested in continuing your learning and improvement as you implement a system of great schools strategy. There's a lot of benefits to embracing learning mindsets, and specifically for the Chief Innovation Officers on this call, want to point out a few that we really think are fundamental to system of great schools. So when you're in a Chief Innovation Officer role or Chief Portfolio Officer role or Chief Innovation Officer role, you often have visibility cross-organizationally that you can utilize to improve your district and the district's work year over year, leading to faster, more significant impact for students. So I'm really thinking about how to embrace the learning mindset to leverage the cross-organizational data and systems that you're seeing to ensure that you're driving better outcomes for students. You also have an opportunity to strengthen the coalition of stakeholders who understand and support the work that you're doing by continuing to embed feedback into the after action reviews and the improvement cycles that you have, as well as showing how you're acting on that feedback. And I think that critical step of going from reflecting to, so what, now what, is really an important piece of the work and something that Chief Innovation Officers and district leaders can help drive. And then last but not least, you can use your innovation platform to model continuous improvement in ways that might inspire adoption in other parts of your district. So if you're implementing the system of great school strategy, or even if you're looking at one component within the system of great school strategy that you're executing or working on, like your first portfolio planning cycle, it is an opportunity to both try out more formal ways of reflecting and acting, as well as to model for others what that could look like, whether that's down to the school level, across to other departments, with the board. It really works in a wide range of ways. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Stard, who's going to talk a little bit more about some examples of what this can look like.
Thanks, Margot. And I think, Margot and I are big continuous improvement groupies. And so we, even since yesterday morning in hearing from the Tulsa team, have been reflecting on all the connections and ideas that have generated by Summit. One thing that stood out to me was this concept of the first team that Dr. Gist spoke about yesterday, and that team articulated. I personally had never heard of that concept, but I've been reading about it and listening to it in between breaks between Summit. And I wanted to share a video that talks about one of the concepts of the first team and this idea of the importance of embracing conflict and seeking authentic input from your colleagues. Because to me, the connection that was immediately drawn was to these benefits that we outlined here, that by baking continuous improvement into the way in which you do work, you can really build authentic engagement of the teams that you need to drive impact, to build that group of allies that are ultimately going to see this work through, and to really model it as a way of organizational culture building that ideally will catch on beyond just the CIO's office. So with that, I'm going to make a new share and see if we can share a moment of this video with you all. All right. Hopefully I've made it so that the ads will not bother you.
Why is conflict so important? Because it leads to real commitment. See, if the team doesn't have conflict and it makes a decision, but nobody really weighed in honestly, you can have very little confidence that there's actual true commitment. The company Intel, they used to have this great culture where they said disagree and commit. go into meetings and they would be brutal with each other. It was kind of a sport, like, you're an idiot, that's a dumb. And then after the meeting, they go, okay, so what's the decision? All right, we're going out together. So they prep them for that. The idea is, though, it's better to have conflict that leads to real commitment than it is to go, hey, let's not talk about this, and then I will just make the decision as a leader. Because when the leader makes the decision and avoids the team having any conflict, which is very tempting, because like, hey, listen, I don't want them to disagree. I don't want them to have any conflict. I'll just make the decision. Are they going to actively commit to that decision? No. You know what they're going to do? They're going to nod their heads and smile. Then they're going to go back to their teams and they're going to go, I don't know if this is a good idea. Yeah, exactly. And then they're going to alligator arm that decision. Oh, let me help with that. No? Oh, okay. They're not going to really dive in and help. If you want commitment, the kind of commitment that comes from people who are like, I am totally in with you, you have to entertain conflict. And you know something? Even if at the end of that conflict, they don't agree. Even at the end of that conflict, Carrie says, I still don't know if this is the right decision. And you have to say as the leader, I know it, but I've listened to you all and I get your opinion, Carrie, and maybe you're right. But here's the deal. We've talked about this and I'm the leader and I have to break this time and I need your support. You know, 99 times out of 100, Carrie will support that decision because she knows that her input was heard. She knows it was factored in and it can be explained. People don't need to have their way. I mean, how many people here are like, if I don't get my way, I can't support a decision? None of us are like that, unless it's unethical or immoral. But most times, as long as we know we've been heard and we understand the process that the leader went through to make the decision, we'll support it. When we don't have conflict, we make it impossible for people to truly commit.
All right. For me, that was a really helpful cross-pollination connection from something I learned from the Tulsa team to thinking about now what the value of creating a space for conflict, for input, and for continuous improvement might be. So we're going to return to our discussion of learning organizations and talk a little bit more about David Garvin, who kind of provides this framework to us, the building blocks of learning organizations. So he talks about 5 building blocks in his building a learning organization piece. The first is around systematic problem solving, complementing that with experimentation with new approaches. This kind of middle tier here is about both learning from your own experience and past history. We know there's few things that are new in education. There's a lot to be learned from the historical and institutional memory of our communities and of our system. And also learning from other folks, right? I think SGS in particular is a place where the idea of not reinventing the wheel has been adopted fully. And there's a lot of really fantastic sharing happening on that front. And then finally, at the top of this building blocks piece is the last part of a key successful learning organization, which is the idea of being able to take all those learnings and transfer them quickly and efficiently throughout the organization. So what does this look and sound like in SGS districts where these building blocks are present? A systematic problem-solving approach might sound something like it does in districts where there's an annual planning cycle that already has a predictable process that's been established. So you might hear, for instance, at the Lubbock board meeting from this past year in February, the CIO there stood up in front of the board and said, as you know, our annual planning cycle has 3 steps, right? First, we conduct our quality seats analysis. Second step is that we use that quality seats analysis to identify schools with the strongest case for school action. Final step is that we're matching those campuses with the best fit school action for them and obviously pursuing the planning and financial resources around that. So that's one example of a systematic problem-solving approach within an SGS organization. On the experimentation side, you might hear or think about in your organization being able to say that your new school design work that's underway at 2 of your lowest performing elementary schools is being thought of as a critical demonstration project, as one that will pilot and seed a new way of working that ideally can be codified and scaled over time. Building block 3, learning from your own experience and past history. You might say, all right, now that we've decided how we're going to measure and report on the impact of our school improvement strategy. Perhaps you're thinking about a district-wide ESF-aligned process. You could raise your hand and say, hey, my office is going to go ahead and schedule an after-action review for the spring, because we know that by then we will have done ESF diagnostics at all of the priority schools. We'll have some experience under our belt. And I just want to go ahead and pre-commit to the idea that we're going to come back and do an after-action review to see what's working and what could be better as we go into the following school year. In terms of what it might sound like to learn from others, you could say, I've actually gone through the SGS handbook and reviewed the exemplars that were provided on the QSAs and portfolio plans from other SGS districts that have been doing this work. And I think there are 3 places where we could improve our approach, or there are 3 particular visuals that I think would be most critical to put in front of our superintendent or in front of our board that I saw at these other districts that we can just literally take off the shelf and apply our data to and use them this year. And then finally, transferring knowledge. So you might hear something like the PLC protocol that we found after doing a portfolio planning process and tiering our schools and understanding what schools have achieved and maintained strong performance, our strong and steady schools. We've identified a PLC protocol at those schools that is common across them, and we've baked that into the pre-service training for all of our elementary schools, and are going to reinforce that with our instructional coaches. So we have a way of taking our learnings from SGS and otherwise and pushing it out to the organization. So I know that that this is, the idea of continuous improvement gets talked a lot about, by folks like Lincoln with the first team, or Garvin on a Harvard Business Review. But obviously, you all are the first and primary practitioners of continuous improvement because it's the heart of education, right? It's learning and growing and expanding minds. So not new concepts here, but perhaps some helpful angles to help you wrap your arms around what that looks like in your organization. So I wanted to pause here and just get a sense from you all as you think about these 5 building blocks. I'd be curious if you could put into the chat what you feel like among these 5 are the greatest, or is the greatest strength for your district. Thanks, Melissa. Sharing that you feel like in Victoria, you all have really honed in on learning from the experiences and best practices of others. And actually, Margot texted me excitedly earlier and said, Melissa's talking about an after-action review in her session, which is another fantastic cross-pollination. Sounds like you all are already putting a lot of even this reflective process into practice. Would you be willing, Melissa, to share, for the folks that weren't in that session, like myself, share what, how you all have been able to really leverage your learnings from others, or broadly after action reviews in your SGS work? Oh, we can't unmute. We're having the same problem that we did before. Superhero Michael, do you have any idea of why that's happening?
There is something about permissions. Give me just a second.
Great. While we're working on that, would love other input in the chat if you're able to find that chat button at the bottom of your screen. I know there's a lot crowded on these Accel events views, but if you can find the chat button and share what other of these building blocks feel like they are most resonant with how your district currently works. Great, I see Craig from Longview, that that you all are front and center with experimentation. I would have nominated Longview as the poster child for experimentation as well. So kudos to you all for leaning into that. And Mark, I see you as well chiming in about learning from others and best practices. All right, we'll give Michael another moment to see if we can resolve the audio lockdown that we're experiencing. I think that the flip side of this is, where is there energy for growth? So as you think about these 5 building blocks and the quick whip around we did on what they might look and sound like in an SGS district, is there a particular building block that you would say you feel like is the most obvious place for growth for your district? Not everybody at once now. The chat can only handle so much. Experimentation, yeah. I see some systematic problem solving, some learning from others, and systematic problem solving. Great. Well, appreciate that feedback, Melissa. We'll hope. Oh, you might be unmuted now. Can you try and share your voice? No, you're muted again. Interesting. Okay, it looks like you're unmuted for a moment. All right. Well, we'll keep trying at that. If we can circle back and get some conversation going, that would be great. And in the meantime, we're going to dive into the actual application of these pieces. I don't know about you all, but I feel like I have scribbled notes on all sorts of Google collaborative documents of ideas and next steps. So at minimum, we're hoping that this work time is a chance for you to reflect on what ahas and light bulbs came to you from Summit so far, and how might you deploy those as a way of learning from the experiences and best practices of others, kind of this block on the right side of your screen. But our planning time really is honing in on this idea of learning from your own experience and past history, and in particular, using the concept of an after action review to do that and bring that kind of feedback cycle to life. So I wanted to walk through just a couple of tactical examples about how other districts have thought about this work. So in one of the SGS districts, they built into their annual planning cycle a deliberate step back, reflect, and look ahead session. So you can see here, these dates are adjusted to be kind of non-COVID related timeline. So sometime in August, before the real churn of the school year kicks in, there was a deliberate conversation at cabinet level that said, hey, what went well last year or in the past few years? What can we do better? And let's really just take apart, dissect all the pieces that we're talking about when we ask that question and get your feedback. So as an example, one of the ways that feedback was gathered is shown here on the screen. So the prompt was to the cabinet of this organization, this district, rewind the clock to last year's annual planning process and the series of discussions that occurred around the schools that were the top priority for bold action. So you'll recall there's kind of this 3-step process. The first is just, school actions aside, what are our schools for top action? and then what are we going to do about them? And then they use Mentimeter, which is really helpful collaboration, kind of real-time surveying tool to get responses across these 4 agree, disagree statements. So how well did the cabinet members understand the why behind the decisions? Did they feel like they had the right information to make those decisions? Was there a clear understanding of the role that each department would have to play in bringing those decisions to life? And did we feel like we effectively engaged impacted stakeholders? And even from this quick snapshot, we gained a lot of insight. You can see here a clear focus area was really around how do we make sure that all departments can see around corners, can understand the end vision of where this is going, and can see their role and the requirements and the asks of their team in bringing this work to life. And so that specifically led to kind of doubling down on kind of a hub of project management where any department head or person at central office could log in, see what the work plan was for a given school action, see where they had been tagged as needing to review something, give input on it, give kind of approval. And it was a way of just making sure that everyone was still in the flow on the school actions that were underway. The second example I wanted to share is a little bit more expansive in nature. And so this team, I imagine, kind of was on a similar growth and learning process to what you heard a bit from the Tulsa team, and that there was a lot of top team alignment work happening in this particular district. And as a result, they wanted to norm around what do we mean when we say we're committed to making high quality decisions. And so you can see here that the group kind of crowdsourced and created what they felt like were the collective qualities of a high quality decision or a high quality decision making process. So that was kind of a step, was to say, what do we all agree is important in our decision making? And then the second step was to take a series of recent decisions. So in the chart on the right here, you can see the decisions that were nominated for reflection really cut across departments. So there was some school closure decisions. There was a decision to pursue funding and school actions for future work. There was a decision to adopt a student-based budgeting process, which kind of changed the way in which the entire budgeting work happened in the district. A new school design and launch process, some kind of ops ERP focused work, some enrollment and choice work. So really cross-cutting across a number of departments, people were able to nominate these big, far-reaching strategic decisions. And then there was a survey of kind of the senior leaders of the organization that said, to what extent were the qualities that we agreed were important for decision-making present in the decisions that we had made in the recent past? And so this was really valuable in saying, on the left side here, across all decisions, where are we kind of falling short in our systems and processes to achieve high quality decisions? And this quality number 7, that there are clearly defined roles, really stood out as one place among many where there could be tools like the RAPID framework from Bain, or just broadly a clear roles and responsibilities matrix that can be set forth. And then on the right side, you can see that by each decision, you could get a sense of how the group was feeling about the presence of each given quality. And so it created a not necessarily conflict-free space, because that's not the point per the video we just watched, but a deliberate space to reflect on what had worked, what could be better, and how do we avoid, I love that concept of the alligator arms, like, sure, I'll help, but only so much. How do we make sure that when you walk out of the room, when you're making these big decisions and placing your bets on what's going to work for kids, that everyone's going to bat for those decisions going forward? So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Margot, for a setup for our discussion in the breakouts.
Yeah, so appreciate, Star, you walking us through some examples from the work that we've seen across Texas and across other places. And, I think what's really important, it's great to see some examples of what it's looked like. And finding the tool isn't the only work to do. So we really wanted to have some time here to ensure that while equipping you with tools, we also create some space to plan for how to actually effectively engage folks. Because so much of the after action review isn't just about the process, it's all about the mindsets and the where it fits within the broader context of the work. So with that said, we're going to open things up to breakout groups pretty shortly, although we have a little bit of an overview and we're going to kind of walk you through how all this works first to help you start planning for an after action review. And when we're in our breakout groups, we'll ask you to really go through these 4 questions. So what is the focus of the after action review? So think of something that you feel like either is about to be done, just was completed, something that ended 6 months ago that you haven't stopped thinking about, that you know you really need to get your thoughts on paper. What is the content or topic or process that you want to do some reflection on? Second question is, who's going to be involved in that after action review? So does this list include the most critical stakeholders responsible for implementing, and really thinking about the full world of who you might need to engage in some sort of reflection, or the type of input you might need to solicit to be able to foster strong reflection and action on your own part? What's the most appropriate timing and frequency of doing an after action review? And does that timing allow for enough runway to incorporate feedback for the work ahead? So for example, if you are reflecting on your enrollment practices, summer is a really great time because you have time from which to work back from your next and upcoming enrollment cycle. If you're reflecting on something like, your budgeting process, this could also be a good time. But there's other things that might not make sense in the middle of the summer to do reflecting on, because there's not enough time to bake in the thoughts and the feedback that you receive into the actions that you're going to take in the fall. So just really be cognizant of the ideal timing. The 4th one is around the barriers to achieving candid, constructive, timely feedback. So Star shared that brief clip that kind of reiterates the importance of creating a space where people can really be critical, productively critical, as well as have productive conflict in their conversations to ensure that you're getting the real feedback you need to both figure out what is working well and decipher that relative to the things that do need improvement or where there's gaps or opportunities to change. And so we want to make sure that you have some time to reflect on these questions. You'll be in a small group of 4. So each group will be in a separate breakout group. And the 4 of you, we encourage you first to just do a quick whip around to get to know who's in your room and get to know each other a little bit. But essentially, we want to do a few different things. After you introduce yourself, we're actually going to encourage you to take about 5 to 10 minutes to individually reflect. And so we're going to drop a folder in soon that has Jamboards for these rooms. If you're assigned to group 1, you'll go to Jamboard 1. If you're in group 2, you'll go to Jamboard 2, and so on and so forth. And for those who aren't familiar with a Jamboard, when you open it up, there'll be these little Post-its across the top. We encourage you to pick a color and keep one color per person through this whole time so that you can see your answers and know, okay, if it's orange, it's Star's feedback. And so you're actually on each page of the Jamboard going to have an opportunity to just answer the question and type as many thoughts as you want to there. So you might have 10 different Post-it notes for a given question, like what is the focus of the after action review? You might have 4 or 5 different things that you want to do an after action review for, and this is an opportunity to just write them all here, and you'll post them. So we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes when you get to your group to individually reflect and add your responses. And then we'll have about 10 more minutes for you all to actually look through, read through each other's reflections and talk about what you're planning for, and talk through the questions you have, or talk through the tools that you're currently using that are working well. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll have about 20 minutes in breakouts to actually get into this and really start thinking about how you'd plan and set yourself up for success to conduct an after action review in your district when you leave. Star and I will be popping around into the room. So if you get stuck or if you have questions, please know we'll be there. You can also call us for help by looking down at the breakout room tab. And then we'll have Michael in this room. If you get stuck when trying to go to a breakout room, we can make sure and assign you to somewhere. Before we hop into breakout rooms, any questions? You can drop them in the chat or see if you can finally get your audio fixed and working if you have questions. All right. Before you leave, again, here is the Google Drive where you'll find all of the different Jamboards there. And so if you're in room 1, you go to 1. If you're in room 2, you go to 2, and so on and so forth. So with that, and not seeing any questions, we're going to go ahead and move you to your rooms. You'll figure out where you are, open your Jamboard, introduce yourself, and have some individual work time first. All right.
How do we feel about people making their way back?
All rooms are closed, all folks are here.
Great, excellent. Well, I'm actually gonna use my privileged platform as former small group participant and now large group facilitator to ask Mr. Ramsey to finish your thought if you can come off mute. You were mid-thought, and I feel like it was one that could be useful for this full group as well.
Well, we had a talk about the way in which equity plays a role in thinking about continuous improvement. And what I was thinking about is that the after action report actually sets a tone or a pace or an opportunity to practice reflection, which is very important when you start engaging and having these sort of conversations that can go a particular way depending on how you're thinking about values and assumptions that you bring to the table. And so I just wanted to say that as an entry level sort of step towards deliberately practicing particular ways of engaging in these conversations, an after action report provides a great opportunity for that. And it may give you a launching point to then have deeper conversations that may address some of those more critical and challenging topics.
I love that. I think it also raises an interesting star, which is like, you can have after action reviews and reflections and planning, some of which are confidential and internal only, but also ones that are, even if it's internally done, externally shared. And so I think that there's this question of audience too, that, when districts can be really authentic and transparent about not just the successes, but also priority areas based on what you're seeing, it really builds a lot of goodwill, not just in the sense of feedback leading to action, but also a common understanding. It's like we're all continuous improving in our work all the time, and there's some humility in that I think people really appreciate.
Agreed. Would love to hear if other folks honed in on a specific topic for your after action review and the objectives that you have for that, or other broad themes that came up in your small group conversations.
Hi, this is Brian. One of the themes that came up is we had was related to new colleagues that are joining this work, and can you use that as an entry point to these types of conversations as a fresh set of eyes on something and incorporating it into a listening tour. If you're new to the district, hey, I'm in your first 90 days, I want to learn more about these. Don't just talk to me about like what happened, but talk to me about the process of how it happened, who was involved, and then I really appreciated the video clip from before to hear places where folks felt valued in the conversation versus did they feel like they were an afterthought. And can you use that feedback not just on the what, but getting to the how and the who, but using that entry point as being new to the district and incorporating it into a listening tour at the start.
I love that, Brian. And for those of you all that are launching SGS anew in your district, it's a natural kind of fresh eyes, fresh ears moment for those reflection and growth opportunities. And even in districts that have been doing SGS for a long time, I know in both of the districts that we're supporting, as we think about the new CIOs in those districts who are replacing outgoing CIOs or kind of setting up a new CIO office, that's such an advantaged point to be kind of at the center of these conversations and prompting these conversations.
I might also just jump in and say the after action review sets up a really proactive and positive framework. And so when we know at the front end that we're going to have ongoing after action reviews because we want to be engaged in continual improvement, that just puts a positive energy into the discussion of autonomy while also providing accountability. So early on, it just sets the culture that we care about kids and we care about getting better. And the goal of this is to get to an A or B. And so as it makes sense, we would have after action reviews. And so setting that up ahead of time so that when we have formative conversations, they don't sound punitive or they don't sound like we're questioning our contract or our commitment to each other. It's like embedded in the culture that we are going to do after action reviews, and it makes a safe space to just talk about autonomy and accountability and make it a part of the culture. So I think that it's nice to set that up early, because if you don't, and then you have to say, you know, I think we need an after action review, then it starts to sound punitive and trust starts to break down. And then the conversation is, you know, nuanced because of that dynamic. So it's really helpful, I think, to just have that continual improvement culture in partnerships.
I think, Marshall, your comment prompted me to think about one of the series of 4 questions, which was like, what are the barriers to this being successful? And I'm curious if in thinking about leading this work, you know, from district folks, what do you worry about, or where has this gone off the rails previously? And what do you take from that in terms of lessons learned about how these can thread the needle of being productive conflict, as I think you framed it earlier, Margot, or, you know, constructive critique that moves to better outcomes?
I would just say, you know, the time that I've seen this go off the rail, it's because everybody waited too long, and the structure wasn't started early. It wasn't a part of the culture that we're going to talk about improving. And so by the time we needed to talk about improving, there were all these things that needed to be said, but the accountability structures weren't there. And so I think early and often, I would always err on the side of early and often. And when it gets too late in the system, then we're too close to like reviewing our contracts and reviewing our renewal decisions. And if you're too close to the renewal decision before you know, it just feels right early in the process to say, listen, looking at our first quarter, I thought these things went really well. I do need our financial reports from your board to come more regularly to know that that's being managed well. It's like you're setting them up for success. You're telling them like, hey, I need this to be worked on, and they know what they can do. It's not like a surprise, like, hey, by the way, we're a month away from renewal and this is a big problem. We need to review it. So I think earlier sets it up as like a really healthy environment of we want to help everyone succeed here, would be my gut reaction. And then I'm curious what other people think.
Melissa, I'm going to cold call you in part to right the wrongs of the first section and see if we can get your voice in the mix, but also because I know you've led some of this work in Victoria. Any reflections you've had on what has worked or how you've addressed some of the friction that might come out of these reflection conversations?
Yeah, you know, and I think what's important, really important, and someone touched on it earlier, is when you develop that culture of and that community of what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're about and how we're going to go about it. And when it becomes ingrained as part of the process, like I don't remember the gentleman who just spoke, that really then it takes that stigma off of it. It's just this is how we do, this is what we do, this is how we do things, this is how we improve. But it's hard because when you are the person who put your heart and soul into it and no one else in the district is doing this one thing and you figured this out and you're shepherding this forward, it's hard to kind of step back and remember it's not about you, it's about the process, and the process is to get better. So I think that's one thing that a lot of times why we shy away or we do continuous improvement light is because we just have to remember that it's not about you and it's not about the person, it's about the process. And that's the important thing that to get into the culture of it. But it is a challenging thing to think always in terms of what's best for the outcomes for our students. And we kind of get mired sometimes in some of the other stuff.
I love that, Melissa. And I think something that your superintendent shared in chat yesterday about moving from closed and knowing to open and learning, I think was the phrase.
Yeah.
I may have butchered that, but it resonated with me so much. And I think our small group really honed in on this virtuous cycle between your top team's culture and continuous improvement. And that, no, even the best, most meticulous process and protocol is not going to solve the cultural piece. But together, if you can bridge those human and systems work, it can really be, unlock tremendous impact for your team on behalf of kids.
Yeah, and I will say that mindset shift of thinking about being open and learning has really been a preconditional foundational piece that's allowed us to move forward with our Systems of Great Schools work. It's a mindset shift, and it really kind of sets you back again. It's kind of what I was talking about. It's not personal. It's about, if you don't know something, that's all right. We're open and learning. That's what we are. And he really brings that to our district, and he's a blessing to us.
I love that. And by the way, it strikes me that it's what we ask of our students and teachers every single day, right? And yet we often don't hold ourselves accountable at the central office to the same rigor of learning and growing on a daily basis. And so again, I feel like it's coming back to the roots of what the entire ed field is about. Well, great. I'm going to propose that, unless there's anything else coming through, that we turn to maybe a one closing thought here. Does that sound right to you, Margot?
It does. I did want to provide one other just push on this front, in the sense of, I really appreciate the comments, and so many things are echoing with me and resonating with me. But I would also just say, like, that open to learning, I would push that it's not just about the process. It's also about, like, how did, I think it can include things around, like, inclusion and equity and bias that are baked into processes too. So would really encourage folks to think very holistically about what you can learn from this type of reflection. So as you're thinking about processes or outcomes, you're also thinking about, process is product. So, like, thinking about how did you bring voices in, and what are you hearing about things? Because, I've led these types of processes myself and found things that I didn't expect to be true. I'll just give a quick bird walk of an example. I oversaw authorizing for a district for 6 years. And we did an after action review each year as a part of kind of codifying what we did, figuring out what we want to improve upon for next year, and then starting to put those things into motion. And, some of those years would be, okay, like, these questions didn't actually really get the types of responses of what we're looking for. This set of questions feels super duplicative of something else. And that to me was more about, like, the content and the process. We also, though, sent out a survey every single year to the evaluators who participated on the evaluation team. We sent one to the applicants, knowing that, yeah, the data would be skewed because some of them got approved and some of them didn't, but we still wanted to know what they were thinking and what they were seeing and experiencing. And so in doing so, we found things that we didn't expect, like on the review team, some folks were compensated because it was a part of their work at the district, and for other folks, they weren't compensated because they were volunteers from the community. And that lack of parity was something that we weren't thinking about, the impact of that, the bias that it represents, in saying, like, these are the officials who are the experts versus these are the volunteers who are helping, and, like, led us to have a model where we gave stipends to compensate for the time of the folks who are participating in the community too. And so things like that you're not necessarily expecting to come from an after action review really can, when you're really thinking holistically about the types of feedback you get. So it's not just about process, it's also about the experience itself too. So just wanted to push on that real quickly as another example within how you can think about and set up these processes. And
just a plug for Mr. Ramsey, who's joined now the Ector County team from Ventura, but even in our short conversation, I feel like it was so exciting to hear from him and about your tremendous experience leading equity work in your previous district, and really the the kind of, two sides of the same coin aspect of that most critical, most paramount conversation for our respective teams to undertake, and how to deploy continuous improvement in support of that priority. Well, with that, we'll turn to our kind of closing thought, which is also one that came up, in our group conversation. This idea that an after action review is a natural kind of inflection point to bring focus and space and time to an in-depth step back and look ahead conversation. But there's also ways, small and large, where this can kind of be baked into daily work. And so just wanted to share a few examples here, and I know there are plenty of others. In fact, if you have other ways that you all have thought about baking this work into your districts, or tools that you've seen that are particularly helpful, would welcome you to share them in the chat or send them to us offline. We can package and share out with folks. I'll just call out one that came up in our small group conversation, this idea of designating a role at your senior leadership team meetings to lift up opportunities for continuous improvement, or to lift up opportunities to advance a strategic objective like your equity focus as a district. And what does that look like? Can you add, just like you have a note taker and a timekeeper as a standard role for your leadership team meetings, can you have a continuous improvement champion or an equity champion? Maybe it's a rotating role because it builds ownership across the team. And that person, really listening for a standard set of questions or reflections that might be useful to carve out 3 minutes at the end of a meeting on, for instance. And Margot, do you want to give voice to your comment here as well?
I'm dropping the specific role descriptions in the chat right now. So it's just saying, yeah, we utilize this in our leadership team as well. And I think both in lifting up things for continuous improvement, but also going back to that, where we started at the beginning around the importance of making sure there's authentic and productive conflict in conversations. We actually have someone assigned to that role within our leadership team, and it rotates every month so that we have a bigger leadership team than 3 people, but we have 3 roles and they rotate through. So everybody gets put in the driver's seat of really trying to mine for conflict and ensure that power dynamics are thought of in conversations like this too. So I put those in the chat in case they're helpful.
I'll just drop in the chat just a starter list of 3 questions that you could imagine putting on the docket for your continuous improvement champion at a key meetings, whether it's your kind of cabinet meetings on a weekly basis or your specific team meetings. So just as some thought starters that might be useful instead of starting from a blank sheet of paper, in the spirit of sharing across organizations, some resources for consideration. Well, we will wrap there from our side, but certainly welcome folks that want to stay on and have a more informal conversation. Happy to stick around. As always, our collective teams are excited about this work and excited about sharing and being supportive of your work to lead this in districts. So look forward to seeing you in the SGS world over the course of the next year and continuously improving alongside you.
Yeah. And Star, I know our email addresses are on the next slide. We'll certainly echo, she and I are both happy to stay on to answer questions and know that we still have about 9 more minutes for anyone who wants to just stay on and chat through this, whether it's problem solving, talking through a tool, whatever, but also feel free to email both or either of us if something comes up after the fact. We're also uploading materials to the event platform, so you'll be able to see those there as well.
And I just want to take a moment of personal privilege and say thank you to Star and to Margot very much for putting together a really great presentation. Thank you very much for this, for taking the time and sharing the content. It's much appreciated.
Thanks. We love to do it. Anyone have any questions? I know some folks are hopping off, but for those staying on, happy to talk through whatever is top of mind to you related to the idea of continuous improvement or after action review protocols. Trying to use my teacher wait time star before we close out.
I know. Of course, my dogs have not barked all day, and I knew they were going to bark during my only my only time today. Well, I think this conversation prompted for me, Margot, a few more resources that I'll put into that Google Drive folder for folks.
That sounds great.
This could be something we keep alive over the course of the year, even because I know it was a perennial topic among CIOs at workshop, and it could be something. Speaking of continuous improvement of CIO workshops, maybe it's something we kind of, continuous, like bake into each step along the way if there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
There's a few that come to my mind. I think one, I think it's just it's often like so many of these things like succession planning, which is topic earlier today. So a lot of these like meta processes, I feel like always hit the cutting room floor when you're time constrained and capacity constrained. So I think just making time for it and prioritizing it is the biggest challenge. And that's why I think the CIO role is such a powerful physical manifestation of this commitment, because it's innovation in the topic means that you get the kind of license to say, I'm going to carve out time to focus on this because it's important to me. It's important to our organization. We have to have an innovation engine that's fed by reflection and experimentation. So that's one. I think the other big one in my mind is just what's the top team culture, which is why that first team clipped resonated with me so much. Because if the superintendent in particular is not championing this kind of radical transparency, let's duke it out, but then let's walk out with arms united to drive this work and make it happen, I think it can be pretty stifling to have an environment to have these conversations. So I still think you can model it within your smaller team. You could even offer to be kind of the guinea pig or model for the senior team. But ideally, it opens up a bigger conversation about how to build that first team, that cohesive leadership team and organizational culture. Those are two things for me. What else would you add, Margot?
Yeah, I think that's those two definitely rise to the top of the list in terms of challenge, just like time and understanding that it becomes habit, like the routine of it, being in a culture where you can admit to mistakes. I would add, the flip side of the mistakes is the celebration part. And I feel like often when doing after action reviews, people focus squarely on the critical pieces and immediately jump to solutions versus saying, the purpose of this after action review is to identify gaps or missteps, as well as things to build off of that are successful before getting to the solutions, so that the solutions can be like, okay, well, what were the things that were working, and could any of that be leveraged to help improve in the gap areas? Or who do I need to bring to the table to identify the solution? Because it's not always the people who are doing the after action review that's inclusive enough to really be all the voices that need to be present for the solution. So I think keeping it as a self-contained conversation that's purely about just surfacing what needs to be surfaced and the actions that need to be taken next to move forward, not actually feeling like you need to leave with a perfectly created solution that is only addressing your weaknesses, but doesn't in any way leverage, it only adds to, it doesn't leverage or build off of or simplify down to the things that you're actually doing really well, which is a critical part of an after action review.
100%. And I feel like one of the resources that we talked about sharing, Margot, was that retrospective set of prompts. It's just a website with kind of pre-action, post-action, just facilitation prompts. But I think what they do well, regardless of your entry point, is a reminder that you need a bucket for what's working, in whatever way you want to frame that, and what can we celebrate and codify and build on. So 100% agree.
I love that we found a question hidden amongst the last of the folks here. I know we have 2 more minutes and there's still technically 8 people on this call, only 3 of which are the people facilitating. So anyone else have a final question or idea you want to bring up?
All right, we'll chalk it up to being stuck in the matrix somehow, the Sullivan's matrix. But you know where to find us. Thanks, Margot. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you both.
Off to the next session. Thanks, y'all.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.